Asperger's is a syndrome that makes interacting with others, reading others' physical body language, facial expressions, voice tone very difficult for someone with Asperger's to understand. Thus, it makes it hard for them to share that same expression back to others so that they're understood with what they're actually choosing to say. Those with Asperger's, at least in Katie's situation, definitely needs a routine. She can flow with changes, but it needs to have some time to work with that. Part of Katie's Asperger's is her sensory challenges, particularly sound and light. When she was younger, we had a lot of the clothing, tactile, texture, sensory issues. I think she's just kind of managed to work through that herself through time, but now very much sound and light, too loud of music, too harsh of light, smells, strong odors, really, she just can't handle that. She wants to know that her ponytail is as secured as it can be and it can't hang loose. She wants to make sure her purse is just positioned right so she knows that it's there, just that reliability and dependability of where she expects things to be. But the sound, light, and odor sensory issues are really challenging for her. Ironically, she didn't really get humor until she was 5th or 6th grade. She didn't get a joke. She laughed and she got some humor, but just jokes, just typical humor like that, she didn't get the connection because there's like a dual meaning there somehow, and she was very concrete with things. It wasn't until the Three Stooges in 5th and 6th grade that I did not really want her to watch the Three Stooges with my husband. And it was Saturday nights, and it was like a fun time, and they would just all sit on the living room floor and watch the Three Stooges, and Katie started getting jokes because it was so obvious what these physical humor and jokes was going on with them. It seemed to just kind of open a whole world to jokes to her. So when Katie was very young, it made parenting very interesting because all the instructions, it seemed like you'd read from parenting books and magazines and things, would talk about the timeout chair or a timeout space. Well, for Katie, timeout was just another wonderful place to play. She really wasn't a difficult child. She wasn't a disobedient child. She wasn't, she really didn't try to disobey. Things would happen, obviously, as kids do. But if I did have to put her in timeout to try to help her understand that wasn't appropriate behavior and remove her from that situation and let her sit in timeout to try to change that behavior, it was like I put her in front of a grand screen TV or a movie screen to most people, because she was delighted. No one interrupted her. She could think and dream, and there was no negative impact on her by sitting in the timeout chair. It was just a wonderful, oh, great, Mom, thanks for rewarding me. She loved sitting in timeout chair. It was quite difficult. I remember back to the day I remember reading that your child wants to please you. If you just help model and help them understand what good behavior is, they'll work towards that behavior because they want to please you. Katie, it's not like she didn't want to please us. It's not like she was disobedient or, totally non-compliant. She just was unaware. She didn't learn by mimicking a behavior, like you dust, your daughter dusts, that kind of thing, or your kid will dust with you or vacuum, or if you rake the leaves, they'll rake the leaves with you. She doesn't notice what you're doing particularly. She just is very in the Katie world. And so those two concepts of parenting Katie made it very difficult because it just didn't fit the norm. Somehow with Katie, I had to make everything very concrete for her. I couldn't say, don't run in the street or you might get hit, because that had no meaning to her. I had to, don't run in the street, a car may hit you, they may run over you, you will break your bones, you will have to go to the hospital, and your skin will be torn. I had to put everything in that concrete of a term for her, which kind of freaked her younger brother and sister, particularly her younger sister, out because she saw everything very precisely. So we had to balance what we were saying to people with that and which kid in the family we were talking to at that time. But everything had to be very, very explained to Katie. one time we were at the mall, and we were walking through the mall. Katie does not notice if she's not near you. She has no fear if she's not near mom and dad or whatever adult is with her. She would just wander on ahead, and we'd pull her back. We'd have to catch up to her or try to get her attention to call her back. She would keep wandering ahead. We'd pull her back. Finally, we just decided to do an experiment. We let her go ahead and wander. She wandered in and out of the stores. She wandered. She'd look around. This mall had huge pillars every once in a while. So my husband and I were playing like spies, hiding behind the pillars, watching her. We stayed in contact with her all the time, but, watching her. But she would go in and out of stores. I'm amazed no clerks did anything about it. But we would like hide behind pillars and watch her, and then we'd hide behind another pillar so she couldn't see us. It was, we're talking a good 30, 45 minutes or so that she would just walk through the mall, not even aware that we weren't there. And it was just, we finally had to go up and physically take her with us to go home because she just kept walking around. That happened a couple different times when we were, not that we did the experiments all the time, but it was really more than most children. She just didn't understand there was other danger out there. At 13, I had like a huge shock because I looked at her little calendar that she was keeping. I think it was it her 13th birthday? So it was when she was 12, actually. She had pre-written on her 13th birthday that she was going to leave home that day. So I'm like, one day I'm talking, it's like, so Kate, what's this about? You're going to leave home. She goes, oh, I'm going to go on an adventure. And I forget her exact words, but it was kind of like the boxcar children thing where they wandered off and they'd walk by a bakery and somebody would give them some bread, and this guy would let them work in the grocery or in the garden, and they would bring home vegetables, and they would set up by a little creek and, all this, and they'd get fish or whatever. Her word, she was going to rely on the kindness of strangers. At 13, she did not yet have an awareness that the world is not all the stories in a book. And it was a hard time. We had to sit down and have a really serious talk about what can happen in the world. Her idea was she was going to ride her bike to parks, and she was going to camp overnight in parks, and then find friendly people that she could do chores for and wander on. It was just, what a pure and wonderful spirit. It's kind of sad when you have to bring the reality of the world in. Part of the school, she was so tired at school by the time she got done with school, because just existing in the classroom was so hard. The fluorescent lights make a sound that most people don't hear, that we learned early on, even from a very young child, fluorescent lights were very hard for her. The voices in the classroom, it was a very crowded classroom. The bell ringing periodically, the transitioning from one subject to the next, was just keeping up with all of that and trying to understand where she's supposed to be and what she's supposed to do was all so hard for her. She was so tired from that. She would just come home exhausted. She wouldn't have the energy, let alone to do homework, to do anything. She barely had the energy to have dinner with us. Once we brought her home for homeschool in October of 3rd grade, the first year we just kind of had to save Katie. She was in a very, very difficult emotional time. It was the challenges of the school schedule, the school environment, not being able to learn at the schedule that the other kids were. They were getting into a much more, 3rd grade, they're getting into a much more testing environment. If you didn't have the assignments done, you would have to sit on the side of the room, while the other kids would have activities and special events. And somehow, even though Katie had an IEP, it never seemed to follow through with that. So she just had amazing anxiety and sadness. I wouldn't say depression, but she really was at that point. So we went to museums, we went and adventured, we just did all kinds of stuff her first year that we brought her home, and just kind of we got some great Bible studies that we started doing to help her get in touch with that and to understand that. Because, we came to the conclusion that God made this amazing child to be who she is. God has a plan for her. The plan is not for her to get squashed down and to fit into some role that's not hers. The plan is for her to grow and develop into who God has for her. With that, we had to enhance her creativity. We had to help her come to know who she is and who her abilities are and let her grow. We had to help her learn to be an independent human being. Not being able to tell time, not really being able to read, not really being able to count and figure math played into that. So obviously academically, those were things that we hit really, really hard at home. In a way that worked for her, not worksheets. Worksheets were a prison cell. Worksheets were a wretched prison cell for her. We tried things, we just did a lot of physical, going outside and jump counting on the bridge across the river, just doing all kinds of fun activities. We would find ways to do fractions on the driveways in the neighborhood. We'd take chalk and write, how many parts in the driveway and 1/4, 1/2. A lot of physical things with that. That was all one-on-one with me still, pretty much. She would, even after we pulled her out of public school and began homeschooling her, she still received services at our local public school with the same LD resource teacher who was just wonderful for her. Through those 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade years where she was still going back over for special services, she volunteered at the library. After she served, she would go in and help shelve books. She's always loved libraries. Always. From a little kid, she wanted to be a librarian. So she would go in and work with the librarian to help put books back and to do chores. So that was some independent work that she was learning. We always found the opportunity to have adults that could be mentors or teachers for her, not in the formal classroom setting, people that could work with her. Different friends that she's had through the years, as they matured up another level, it seemed like they still liked Katie, but obviously they'd moved on to a new plateau. They'd moved on to a different level. And so it kind of left Katie a little bit. It just was hard because they were different than she was. There was a year or two where she was really hurting for friends. It was hard. We were involved in so many activities. By then she was homeschooling, but we were very involved in 4-H and active in that on a very regular basis. And it was a great group of people, just nobody that she formed that friendship with. Her friends were actually much older people. She seemed to connect with the older people much more. She could just sit and have a nice conversation with them. And it just somehow it didn't have all of the difficulties of emotions and personality understanding that it did when she was with kids her own age. Ironically, one of her next best wonderful friends was when Katie was doing a sword fighting talk at 4-H. And all of a sudden, her wonderful friend, her current wonderful friend, Alyssa, who loved pirates at the time, thought, wow, sword fighting. They had been in this 4-H club for like 5 years together, I think, and had not really noticed each other. And all of a sudden, through a common interest, because you'll notice hyper-focus, hyper-interests, is a real common trait of Asperger's. And so that was how she and Alyssa became friends. And it's just been a wonderful, wonderful friendship throughout that time. I think the thing that is the hardest for people to understand or to even grasp with Asperger's, at least from what we work with Katie, is the amount of effort and the amount of time that every little step forward takes. When she was younger and she was learning academic skills in school, reading or math or something, I remember her LD teacher would share with me that she and Katie would work on something for a year, and it just seemed to just not go in. Katie tried. She always was a willing student. She tried so hard, but it just wouldn't go in. They'd put it aside. She'd come back to it a semester later, and somehow it had just worked inside of Katie's head in that time period. They came back to it, and now it's working. And I think that's with so many skills that we all need to grow up and to live independent lives, productive lives. Every little skill has to be learned. There's very few things in life as an Aspie that just are learned, that you just sit beside somebody doing the same skill and now you know how to do it. That just doesn't happen for an Asperger person that I have seen. It has to be very purposefully explained in steps the whole way